Welcome to another edition of Dolphins In Depth, the podcast provided to you by the Miami Herald. I'm your host, Omar Kelly. Joining me is a very frustrated, angry, annoyed. Which word best describes you, Barry Jackson?
Indignant. Indignant would be the word, Omar, because we've seen a quarter century of this nonsense. I called it last night, a quarter century of nonsense. That should be the new hashtag, right?
Listen, here's funny you say nonsense because I'm trying to write my column for tomorrow's paper, and my opening line of it is, whose job is it to make sense of all this nonsense? And that's really the question that I'm asking myself. How did we get ourselves in this predicament? And you know, we're referring to the Dolphins' fourth quarter 28-27 loss to the Arizona Cardinals. Miami basically collapsed in the fourth quarter, allowed the Cardinals to score 9 points that put themselves in position to win that game with a game-sealing field goal. Kyler Murray was on fire, completing 4 passes, converting a third down, running the ball. That allowed, the Cardinals to basically just kill the clock. And Barry, fight with me on this, but we've seen the entire season where the defense held up the offense with the exception of the Buffalo Bills game. And this was the first time where the defense, as Emmanuel Ogbah said, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, pooped down their own leg. And do you put that loss on the defense?
I put it on both of them, and I want to tell you why. Offensively, I was unhappy with deployment of personnel on the final drive, where you have Devon Achane, who had the hot hand all day, 10 carries for 97 yards. Mostert had 9 for 19. So why in the world was Mostert, with all due respect to Raheem, who's been a terrific player here, why in the world was Mostert getting the carry late in the game, 1st and 10 from the 48-yard line instead of Achane? So that resulted in no gain. Second down, there was a rush throw to Julian Hill for a yard. Third down produced nothing, and then they punted, and then Arizona went on its winning drive. So offensively, I take issue with that. You have to ride the hot hand. You have to give the ball to Achane or even Jalen right there, despite Mostert's body of work and despite the fact that he's been a sterling player here. Number 2, how do you excuse Tyreek Hill getting 1 target in the second half? I found it very interesting last night. Drew Rosenhaus's agent on his weekly segment on WSVN 7 locally, the Fox affiliate, said, quote, "Shame on you" to the Dolphins for giving Tyreek Hill only 1 target in the second half. And you know what? He's absolutely right. This is criminal to repeatedly not use the player voted by his peers as the best in the league at any position. Certainly, you could make the case non-quarterbacks. He was the best player in the league last year, not the case this year. But how can you not involve him more in the offense? So I don't want to hear it was all the defense's fault. Of course, the defense was a catastrophe yesterday, and they have the majority of the blame for yesterday. But this was at least somewhat on the offense. Is that fair, do you think?
Who had possession of the game when the game was on the line? Yes, the offense failed on that final drive. Maybe if it was a better thrown screen pass to Achane, it would have resulted in a first down. Maybe we continue to drive out the clock. Maybe we kick a field goal. Okay, yes. But the last time I checked, the Dolphins offense handed the defense the lead. They put them on the 11-yard line with 5 minutes left to go. And you tell me the best defense in the NFL on third downs cannot get off the field?
Well, of course you have to blame it on the defense, but I want to add this. At least the offense had all of its arsenal except for Isaiah Wynn, who maybe might play by 2034, and River Craycraft. Okay. But they were at full strength. At least the defense could say, look, we were without Bradley Chubb, we were without Jalen Phillips, we were without Zach Sealer, who's obviously a critical piece, right? And we were without Javon Holland in the second half. So the defense can say, look, guys, we were without 4 of at least our 5 best players. Ramsey's one of them, maybe 4 of our top 6 players. So at least they had some level of excuse, even though their performance on that final drive was hot garbage. So, but the offense cannot make that excuse. The offense was at full strength. This was a Dolphins offense that was supposedly able to run out the clock against a trash defense that was missing its whole defensive line, that came in 26 against the run, 26 against the pass. So you're telling me it's excusable for the Dolphins to rush out the clock, this ballyhooed offense where everybody gets contract extensions, and you're saying it's acceptable to punt late in the game and give the ball back to Arizona? Of course you can blame the defense, but the offense has a share of the blame yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it throughout this season, and this is the problem that I have with trying to figure out and sort of point fingers of blame, because we know we've covered the Dolphins organization for quite a while. We know we are officially at the finger pointing stage here, where people are going to say, "It's not me, it's you. It's you. You did it. You did this. You built this roster. No, you coach this team. No, you chose this player. No, we are there." Okay, maybe we're 1 week from being there, because Sunday's game against the Buffalo Bills, your second opportunity to get an AFC victory over Daddy. You can potentially, I'm going to say this to you, Barry, and I want your immediate response. You can potentially save this season with a victory over the Buffalo Bills on the road.
Yes, you can, but how realistic is that? I mean, is there going to be a snowstorm, in Miami Gardens? This all falls on two people. Let's be real about this. Obviously, McDaniel has some of the blame, but this falls on Stephen Ross, who has to get his head out of the sand and realize that he does not have the people here to build a championship organization. And it falls on Chris Grier, who's made repeated personnel mistakes. And the funny thing about Grier in terms of it being Teflon, and I know Dave Hyde, our colleague from the other newspapers, called him GM for life. But what's funny is Chris Grier can always find a way to keep his job just by saying, I didn't make that pick. Mike McDaniel was the one who told me to go into the season with Skylar Thompson and Mike White as a backup quarterback. So we can always tell Steve Ross, it wasn't me. It's kind of like the guy who's charged with tax evasion, not saying Chris Grier committed any crime. The guy who's charged with tax evasion said, but wait a minute, I had the accountant who was handling all of the numbers for me. I didn't know any of these things. The accountant told me the numbers were fine. I didn't know I was doing anything wrong. So it's the same thing with Grier, where he can always say, no, that was our regional scout. That was our West Coast-based scout. That was Mike McDaniel who told me I had to go into the season with Skylar Thompson, Mike White as my backups. So if Chris Grier is always going to pass the buck, then how would Steve Ross ever hold him accountable for anything?
It's funny you say that, because I remember when he took over as the general manager in 2016, I talked to a number of his peers for a story and a profile piece that I was doing on Chris Grier. And the one unilateral thing is no conviction. And these are people who liked him. He never had any conviction about anything, and and honestly, this is not going to become a Chris Grier diss session, because I've written my piece about where I feel he is. If you, and I said this before we went into the Arizona game, you need to win 4 of the next 5 games, or it's time to pull the plug on Chris Grier. And I don't mind firing him during the season, just because it gives you a head start, and hopefully Louis Riddick is where that start finish, where that search finishes. But I am. If everybody always says no conviction, and he's in power because he's a uniter of people, and he's easygoing, and he's easy to work with, and he lets every coach do what they want and build how they want and take what they want, how is that leadership? That's collaborative team effort. But if we're doing a group project, and somebody's got to lead the group project, Barry. And unfortunately, we don't have a group project where there is a leader that's designating or taking the lead on who's doing what. But my bigger issue is, how can he be blamed for this Arizona Cardinals loss? And hear me out on this, okay? He didn't hire Anthony Weaver. Anthony Weaver is the guy who made those calls on that field. He isn't a quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa, he wasn't the offensive coordinator who called those plays. They had the entire game. They were the clear better team. So how is it Chris Grier's fault that they lost the game? And mind you, let me throw a couple more at you, Barry. Okay, you lose Javon Holland. You got Marcus May in there. No step back. You're performing well. Okay. Cam Smith is on the field. You drafted him. It was okay. It wasn't that tremendously great, but Marvin Harrison Jr. scored on Jalen Ramsey too. And then Zach Sealer. Deshaun Hand played an admirable game. You found him, signed him, developed Deshaun Hand. You're the executive. So now if I'm Chris Grier, I'm standing there. I'm innocent, Barry. I'm innocent.
Well, I want to add one quick thing to that. I agree with you on the general premise that yesterday was not Chris Greer's fault, but I would add this. Chop Robinson doesn't have a sack in his rookie season during a year when the Dolphins desperately need a pass rush. Bottom 5 in the league in sacks. They got no consistent pass rush yesterday.
Had some pressure.
Robinson had a couple of pressures, but once again, he's not getting there. He had 2 sacks against Power 5 teams last year. No sacks against any Power 5 teams or anybody this year. So that is on Greer. But I agree with you generally with the premise that yesterday was not a Chris Greer issue. It was more of a player and coaching issue. From a coaching standpoint, I know Jalen Ramsey was on Marvin Harrison some. Why wasn't he on him more, especially on the last drive? Because he needed to
play nickel. Who's going to play nickel, Barry?
Well, I mean, there were options, obviously, with Saran Neal. I know Javon was out. So I understand the predicament they were in.
But be fair, the predicament was a challenging predicament because you were down your nickel. You chose not to elevate Nick Needham. You did. Saran Neal, come on, Barry. Come on.
Well, I would say that the difference at this stage of the careers of Cam Smith and Saran Neal probably is not dramatic, where I would have preferred Ramsey shadowing Harrison on the final drive and Saran Neal in the slot than Cam Smith on Marvin Harrison, an unproven but talented Cam Smith, and Jalen Ramsey not even involved with targets by Arizona on the final drive. But it's a tough call. Also, player deployment. Why is Jalen Wright, the team's leading rusher, getting only 2 snaps yesterday, 2 carries? Why is Mo Kamara the only outside linebacker who had a single pressure last week against Indianapolis? Why is he inactive and not playing at all? So there's specific coaching things you can point to.
You know they watch practice. This is one thing that I never sit there and feel comfortable criticizing coaches about, because they're watching practice. They see how these guys perform. And for 3 years, Mike McDaniel, you perform well in practice, you're going to play. You're going to get the opportunities. So last week I went in a situation to say, why is Devon Achane getting as many carries as he is when Raheem Mostert's clearly the hotter back? You know what? When guys perform in practice, they give them those opportunities. When guys don't perform in practice, they're not active. Ethan Bonner hasn't been active because he hasn't performed in practice. So, it's hard for me to sit there in personnel decisions now. Do you have a capable backup? Now, it's in this situation where it's Saran Neal, or I even thought Kendall Fuller can go and play inside in the nickel. So I'm not arguing with you on that. There's some wiggle room there. Maybe we could address that with Anthony Weaver. I believe Kendall Fuller has played inside in nickel at some point during his career. I think I remember him at Virginia Tech playing in nickel. It is what it is. He's an established veteran player. My choices are Cam Smith or Saran Neal. I'm going with Cam Smith, Barry. And unfortunately, that forces Jalen Ramsey, who did get scored on by Marvin Harrison, so don't act like he's like some Marvin Harrison stopper, to, be inside the nickel. Also, especially with the scrambling ability of Kyler Murray, I want Jalen closer to the line of scrimmage because I at least have a chance of stopping Kyler Murray, even though Jalen was on the side of the run and scramble. It's unfortunate, Barry. Sometimes you just take an L.
Well, I would say your point about Needham is a good one. I much would have rather had Needham obviously active and playing in the nickel, a role that he thrived in 2019, 2020, and 2021 late in the game, than having Neil Farrell as a fifth defensive lineman yesterday. But I thought of one other thing I want to tell you as far as Greer and accountability yesterday. And again, I preface all this by saying yesterday was not Chris Greer's fault per se, but the other issue I would make, besides the Chop Robinson choice, which hasn't really produced much of anything so far this season, is handling of safety. Shouldn't it have been a bad sign? And shouldn't have Chris Greer paid attention when the Buffalo Bills did not attempt to keep Jordan Poyer? Shouldn't he have paid attention when other teams pursued Brandon Jones, realizing that he has a unique skill as a blitzing safety that certainly would have helped the team now, realizing that he was better metrically in coverage the last 2 years of his career? He was not a liability against the pass. So certainly Chris Greer deserves some blame and accountability for safety and for so far the Chop Robinson pick. And that's why you can't say that his fingerprints weren't at all on yesterday's game. I just want to make clear my position on Chris Greer because I know yours. I don't think Greer has done a horrendous job, but I think there have been enough mistakes that should have raised Steve Ross's eyebrows, right? Heading back to the year that he was promoted, also happened to be the year he picked Charles Harris over Watt. So shouldn't that have been a red flag? I know I bring that up a lot, but to me, you're talking about 2 edge players and you pick the wrong one. And there have been a handful of examples like that, where you have two specific players. Chris Grier picks the wrong one. Shouldn't any of these have been red flags to Steve Ross? So to me, you could totally justify making a change at GM. Here's the other thing I think you could justify, Omar. I think it's time, if Steve Ross simply doesn't have it in him to fire Chris Grier because he's so fond of him and because he's a patient man at 84, then you know what he should do? Hire a respected head of football operations over Chris Grier, where the buck stops with that guy. And that, well, he had it with Bill Parcells years ago. But
we had it with Bill Parcells. We had it with Mike Tannenbaum.
Someone respected where the buck stops with him, and you're not having this hierarchy of. I don't have a name for you right now, but how about he go out and find it? How about he how about he tell Tom Garfinkel to go find one? No? Well, I mean, are you in favor? Wait. Are you in favor?
Adding another layer is not the answer, Barry. We did that before with Parcells, and then it became, the kids are fighting. We did that before with Mike Tannenbaum. Then it was fingers of blame going everywhere. Like, come on.
Just hire a new GM. And I preface those comments, Omar, with this. I said if Steve Ross does not have it in him to fire one of his favorite people, Chris Grier, that would be another option. I'm not saying that's the way I would go, but if that's the way that Steve Ross is comfortable going because he's not capable of telling Chris Grier, I can't have you working for me anymore, then maybe that would be an option. But you're right. The cleaner way of doing it would simply be hiring a new GM. And certainly there's more than enough evidence to validate making a change. The question is, does Steve Ross have it in him? I don't know. I will say this. I know a character trait of people as they get older is to be hesitant to make changes. And Steve Ross generally has been a patient man with executives, Mike Tannenbaum aside, lost some patience.
Not Brian Flores.
Right. I said executives. I didn't say coaches. He said quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hickey wasn't patient. Dennis Hickey wasn't patient.
So I wonder about this both with Steve Ross at 84 and with Pat Riley at 79. Are you simply more reluctant to make changes because you have a comfort level with the status quo as you get into your later years of life? To me, that's a question that I always wonder about with Chris Grier. At 84, does he have the interest, the energy, the effort to simply start over and blow it up? I don't know that he does, but at the same time, I don't think it's by any means certain that Chris Grier is back next year. I think because the season has imploded, and if it continues to implode and they win 5, 6, or 7 games, then I think Ross might feel compelled to do something. But as always, he'll do it. I don't want to say half-assed, but as always, he'll do it only partly, right? Exactly. Or half butt, maybe. He'll do it only partly, where only someone will change. The coach and the GM both won't go. He'll make only one change.
Here is where I have a little bit of blowback with you on this. And while I know the team is not responding to Mike McDaniels at this present moment, and I can say with conviction that they haven't quit, they haven't given up on him. And I know teams and organizations that have quit and given up on him. Now, the concern that I have is whether or not, no matter how the season plays out, and I do believe that there's still fight left in this team, will that fight lead to a victory over Buffalo? Probably not. Will that fight lead to you winning 5 of the next 6 or 7 games? Probably will. Will that lead to a 9 or 8 win season and we're back right there on the mediocrity merry-go-round? That's the reality. That's the That's So Dolphins season that we're headed towards. But the question that I have is, would a full-scale reset be beneficial to this organization, especially when you know the growth, development that Tua has made under Mike McDaniel, the progress that you've made offensively, even though it's not showing that much right now, but we're looking at a sample size where there were 4 games without Tua. Now let's evaluate this process, and which is why I said it's critical that these next 5 games are critical, because it's time to evaluate this team as it was constructed, as it was built. Is the Jonnu Smith package working? Is Odell Beckham a number 3 receiver? Malik Washington, you drafted him. Is he developing into a slot receiver now that Braxton Barris is gone? is your offensive line that you mocked and laughed us. Are they as productive as you ultimately envisioned in year 3 of what you're installing? Your defensive line, is your defensive line stout enough, even though Calais Campbell had to come in here and put on a cape and save the day? These linebackers, are these linebackers productive enough in order to continue to make you one of the best run-stopping defenses in the NFL? Clearly, it isn't the case right now. But what about your secondary? Your secondary has been one of the stingiest until Kyler Murray got here and just shredded you to death. People make the argument that the secondary has been playing mediocre quarterbacks or weak. I think you made it Friday.
I did, and it exposed them a little bit. That said, I'm still bullish on the team at corner. I think they're fine at corner. That's one of the positions Chris Grier hasn't screwed up. I want to answer your question that you asked about, is it time for full-scale rebuild? I expressed this opinion on Twitter on Sunday night. No, you don't rebuild in terms of blowing it up for this reason. Number one, big cap consequences if you do. Number two, even if you're lucky enough to get some draft picks as a result of trading Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or Javon Holland or Teron Armstead, what's to say you're going to not screw up those draft picks? Because the organization has a history of messing up draft picks. They have this whole great draft pick collection, arsenal of picks they got for Tunsil, and what ultimately has it led to, right? I mean, that first round was obviously Tua, who, bless his heart, he's had health issues. Austin Jackson has turned into an average right tackle when he was supposed to play left tackle, and Noah, who's nowhere to be found. So I'm not saying that any of these draft picks would make you a better team ultimately, at least with the current regime in place. Also, it's so difficult to win in the league. I don't know what the point is of trading most of your best players. You have a core collection of good players who, if you're healthy, if they're well coached, if they're augmented by the correct supporting players, they are enough to get you to 9 or 10 wins and at least make you a wild card contender. And on that list is Tua, Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Zach Sealer. There are probably a few others I could throw in there as well. Jalen Ramsey, obviously, that goes without saying. Couple of members of the offensive line. So why do you want to rip those players out and trade them for draft pick? Maybe Javon Holland, depending on how much money he wants, as a player who's been injured a lot this offseason. So why would you trade all of those players for draft picks, which are question marks and maybes? To me, what you need is either Chris Grier needs to make better decisions about the supporting cast, or you need someone to replace Chris Grier who will make those better decisions for him. And I don't want to burst the balloon of Dolphins fans. I'm not telling them anything that they don't know. But to me, the realistic expectation for this franchise is probably a 6 or 7 seed competing for a wild card every year. They just don't have what's needed to build a championship contender. And if Steve Ross doesn't see that, then he's blind. There need to be fundamental wholesale changes in the organization if the ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl. But with the players they have, if they're healthy and if things break right and if they make a few better decisions around the edges, like nose tackle, like backup quarterback, then yes, this could be a relevant team for the next 5 years, winning anywhere from 9 to 11 games a year. Maybe Buffalo loses Josh Allen one year. Maybe they sneak in and win the division one year. But at least they should be most years in wild card contention. That, to me, is the ceiling with this core. I told you that in July. I told you in July this is not a championship core, and it's even farther from a championship core than it was then. That being said, if Phillips and Chubb and Sealer and Holland are all healthy and the offense is healthy, yes, this can be a 10 or 11 win team. We saw that last year. But any aspirations of this being a team that can make a deep playoff run, I think you're kidding yourself. So Dolphins fans, my last point in this long-winded soliloquy is this. My last point is Dolphins fans have to be realistic that the best you can hope for with this core of players is just being contending most years for a wild card berth. Maybe you win the division one year. You're in the discussion. You're not an embarrassment like the franchise has been for years. And just accept that. Hope one year you get a playoff win, but forget any hopes of winning Super Bowl with this core. That sure as hell is.
Well, I don't know about that.
So I would just be happy with this core and just hope you make better decisions around it.
I don't know.
How is this core, Omar, going to ever beat Kansas City or Baltimore? Two pillars of excellence in terms of building their franchise.
You make an excellent point. You make an excellent point. Two would have to put on a cape and deliver a career performance. Here's my only problem with what you're saying. If we're built on the same model as the 49ers and the 49ers are having similar issues to the Miami Dolphins, and we saw the 49ers made it to the Super Bowl 2 straight years, I think. Can't remember. Yeah, they lost to Kansas City, and then did they make it
Well,
last
they've
year?
lost to KC twice, obviously. The one down here in 2020, and then again, obviously, last year.
Yeah. You're close. You just don't have what it takes to get over 2 elite franchises, really 3 elite franchises in your division. The question is, can you find somebody that can build an organization that can do that for you, or do you have to wait for Andy Reid to retire? Very excellent point. I don't know the answer to those questions, but let's address some of these questions that we have for Javon Holland, Barry. Javon Holland suffered a knee injury. We know he's coming back from the hand injury. Are we at the point where we're worried about Holland shutting it down, or do you think that this is something that he can fight through?
Well, McDaniel suggested that it's something he could fight through. Holland said, "I'm good," or something to that effect on Twitter last night. So you would think that he would be back at some point in the next couple of weeks. The broader question you're facing with Javon Holland is, do you want to pay someone who's had a lot of injuries top shelf safety money before he's a Pro Bowl player? And if you don't,
he's had 3 injuries in 2 years. It's not a lot.
Well,
it's
yes,
very poorly timed.
That's fair. I would say the correct phrasing on my part should be injuries that have left his game status in question frequently over the last years. That would probably be the most fair way to phrase it. So the question is, if you've made the determination that you don't want to pay him, then you could make the case for him to be the one guy you would trade. I know people said trade Armstead in case he might retire. You could make the case, as I brought up a couple of weeks ago, to trade him and try to get as high a draft pick as you can if you already know that as an unrestricted free agent, there is no path to a contract extension with him. If his agent says there's not going to be a discount because he's been injured, if his agent says I want to be...
Why cash that in for draft picks now without if you're going to let him go, you're going to get a compensatory pick for him anyway. So is trading him now for a 3rd rounder next year not worth waiting for the 3rd rounder in 2026?
Yes, a case certainly could be made. I would also say it wouldn't hurt to see what the marketplace is. If you could get something even a little better, as unlikely as it is. But yes, I could see. Yeah, I hate the notion of losing all of their drafted players, so many of their drafted players that they've developed that have worked out for nothing but compensatory draft picks, like they did with Robert Hunt, which was unavoidable, like they did with Christian Wilkins, which was avoidable. And obviously, as they did with Van Ginkel, there's not going to be any compensatory pick for him, and now if you lose Holland, what you do is you keep losing players who you have developed and drafted. You hit on so few of your draft picks to begin with. So to keep losing players that you have developed, that would be difficult. It's hard to envision them paying him a Pro Bowl safety money unless he has a tremendous close to the season and he's healthy over the final 10, 11 games. It's difficult for me to envision, but with this organization, who can possibly predict it? Maybe he'll give him the biggest contract in the history of NFL safeties, knowing how they operate sometimes.
Yeah. How concerned are you about Zach Sielerman's status? I saw him in the locker room. He was wearing sunglasses. He was in good spirits. He says he's fine. Obviously, it's a concern about, can you play with a broken orbital bone? I don't see why you couldn't play with a face mask on, with a covering. Make him look like Bane from Batman, which would probably look pretty cool. Do you worry about this defensive line holding it down until Sieler's cleared to play?
I do, more so with the pass rush. I was impressed with their run defense yesterday, averaging or allowing only 3.3 yards per carry. Arizona rushed 26 times for 82 yards. They held James Conner to 2.7 yards per carry. So good job yesterday by Calais, by Benito Jones, by your guy, Deshaun Hant. They deserve a lot of respect for how they played yesterday. At the same time, Sieler is missed. Obviously, he's one of their best defensive players. His pass rush was missed. He's become a very good pass rusher. Rosenhaus said on the WSVN postgame show last night that he hopes he'll be back quickly. He didn't want to give a precise timetable for his line, but the indication is that this would seem like something he'd be able to come back from the next couple of weeks, but we will see. I guess there was still a question about whether surgery would be needed, but we do know There's no player you'd rather have in your locker room on a team more than Zach Sealer, right? So if he's able to play, he's going to play.
He's definitely an Iron Man of throwback to the old days where guys he doesn't even like missing practices. The question is, how many weeks do you have to let the swelling and the tenderness go down? Can he put on a face mask, and what does it look like? What does it feel like? I'm just glad that there's no eye damage there. Probably some cornea scratching. But he seemed fine. He seemed in good spirits. He said he's all right. Any other questions or concerns that you have about this roster heading into the big bad Buffalo Bills week?
Well, I worry, even though, as you correctly said, McDaniel hasn't lost the locker room, and it's a high character group of players. I don't think they're going to give up. But I worry about this. I worry about the season totally spiraling out of control if they are blown out in Buffalo, which is always a possibility against the Bills, knowing they've lost 12 out of the past 13. They've given up 35 points a game against them since Josh Allen came in the league. And half of those games have been decided by double figures, several of them even by 20 points or more. So the question to me, Omar, would be this. If they suffer a total embarrassment next Sunday, it's obviously going to be dispiriting. You're 2-6 at that point. Are they going to let go of the proverbial rope? Are they going to allow the season to spiral out of control where we're talking about a 4 or 5 win season and it's a total debacle, as opposed to recovering from it, playing well and maybe winning at the Rams, and then having 2 winnable games at home against the Raiders and Patriots? So even if you fall to 2-6, there's still an opportunity to go to 5-6 and be on the fringes of playoff contention, at least going into December, even though it's not likely, at least to keep yourselves mathematically in the hunt if that happens. But if they're blown out in Buffalo and then everything falls apart and they're down and depressed and dispirited, then the season could spiral out of control. That's what would concern me.
Definitely. So we will see what happens. We've got a big, important week in the AFC. The Dolphins can save their season with a victory over Buffalo on the road. We would be right here, Dolphins in Depth, covering you for the entire week. See you later.